So why do you think it is that when you sometimes see something really, really beautiful, it kind of produces a, low-level heartache? I mean, how can you be profoundly happy and profoundly sad at the very same time? That's what we're going to look at on today's episode of Authentic. Open a Bible to the first 2 chapters of Genesis and give them a read, especially if it's been a little while. Actually, if you're streaming this, just push pause, go read those 2 chapters and come back, because I think you're going to find this interesting. Here's what I want you to notice. It's almost impossible to read those opening passages and not start to kind of pine for what it's describing. It's a primeval description of the world, and it reveals a pristine planet that is, radically different than the one we live in right now. In fact, you'll notice the Creator steps back at the end of every single day and declares that His work is good. Then on the 6th day, after making the human race, He ups the ante just a little bit and calls it very good. And when you read that, there's a part of you that longs for it, especially when the world we're living in appears to be anything but good. As of right now, as I'm sitting here, that awful war in Ukraine is still being waged. And of course, back in October of 2023, Hamas launched that brutal attack on Israel and did unspeakable things to civilians, which prompted a massive military reply from Israel and led to an awful lot of death and destruction on the Gaza Strip. It's another painful reminder that human beings find themselves mostly helpless to solve our very worst problems. And of course, on a more personal level, there's a pretty good chance that your life has been a constant struggle too. Maybe you're working overtime to make ends meet in this new inflationary economy, or you're dealing with a debilitating disease, or maybe you've got serious family problems. And then you read these opening verses in Genesis and you can't help but feel, a lot of sadness. It's not describing the world you live in, and you kind of wish it was. And that's the way it is with beautiful things, unfortunately. I remember there was this painting in my 12th grade English Lit textbook that captivated me. I found it on a day when we had this really, really bad substitute teacher who seemed like he was in love with himself because he kept prattling on about how unbelievably intelligent his college papers were. I mean, who does that, especially in a high school classroom? He was, in his not so humble opinion, the most insightful man who ever lived. The problem, though, was that he was, number 1, deluded about his own intelligence, and 2, he was also the most egotistical man I'd ever met. So, when I turned the page in my textbook and found this stunning painting from the Romantic period, it was a massive upgrade from what was happening at the front of the classroom. I've always wished I could find that exact picture back, because to this day, I still think it was one of the most beautiful works of art I've ever seen. If you're watching me with visuals, it's not the one that's on the screen. I tried to replicate it best I could. It was a scene from the mountains with a river running in the foreground and a prominent castle high up on a hillside. The colors were breathtaking. The artist had used light so masterfully that it nearly brought tears to my teenage eyes. And I'm not exactly a squishy guy when I walk through an art gallery. I think it was the first time I'd ever been profoundly moved by a painting. I mean, I was used to music making me feel that way, but not really visual art. And it was a really strange emotion. I remember it well because it wasn't just joy or happiness. That scene was so hauntingly beautiful that it actually caused me to feel a little bit of sadness. The only other time that's ever happened is when Gene and I were driving across New Mexico, and I saw this conical-shaped mountain, probably an extinct volcano, with a simple little cabin perched on the side of it. It was one of the most peaceful bits of property I have ever seen. And I suddenly had all these melancholic feelings. It kind of surprised me. So here's the question. Why is it when we're faced with incredible beauty that the joy we feel is almost always coupled with a hint of sadness? Personally, I think it's because we're looking at something that is, for the most part, completely unobtainable. The reality of daily life doesn't match the beauty that you're looking at. I'm reminded of something that the late great Lutheran theologian Helmut Thielicke once said when he wrote these words. He said, "But why is it that this encounter with what is perfect and whole always makes us a bit sad? What is the source of that faint touch of melancholy on the faces of Greek statues in their perfection? Why do beauty and sadness dwell so close together? Why is it that the clear bell-like tones of a boy soprano not only delight but also fill us with aching pain? Why is the utmost of beauty so heartbreaking?" That's a really good question, and it certainly applies to the creation account that you find in the book of Genesis. That describes a world that actually put a smile on the face of God. But when you compare it to the world we're living in now, well, the word heartache is almost a little too tepid. One of my favorite Bible verses is found in the book of Ecclesiastes, where the wise man says this: "He," speaking of God, "has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, He has put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end." Honestly, you and I can't even imagine what it would be like to live in a pristine or perfect world, and yet our hearts still seem to want it. There's something inside all of us that reminds us the world was once a much better place. All of us seem to have this latent memory of a better time and better place, and we also somehow know that we've completely destroyed that original innocence. We've lost that world forever. It's not going to come back, at least not in my lifetime. The very presence of the human race on this planet and the terrible things that we do have become a blight on the perfection of God. Frankly, the way we live is a betrayal of the Creator. So all we can do now is look back on a world that we have never actually lived in and guess at how perfect it might have been, and then experience this profound heartache. The heartache that comes when you recognize real beauty. And here's the thing. We're not the only ones who feel that. God Himself was actually there to witness the perfection of His creation, a perfection He called very good. According to Job chapter 38, when God spoke this world into existence, the, quote, morning stars, that's another term for the angels, the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy. That's how amazing it was. So now think about the fact that God Himself has to look at this unbelievable moral mess that you and I have made, and He has to remember what used to be here. I know that some people don't really like what it says in Genesis 6, where God examines the evil of humanity and He's suddenly sorry that He made us in the first place. Some people point to that passage to say that God's character must be somehow flawed, because what kind of God would want to eliminate the whole human race? Well, I'll tell you what kind of God would be tempted to do that. A God who remembers. A God who smiled with pleasure when He saw the world that He originally made. A God who took delight in bringing the human race into existence because everything was perfect. There was no pain, there was no death. And if my heart is bothered when I think about the hypothetical beauty of that place I've never been, try to imagine how the one who actually experienced it must feel. Let's just think about this. You and I are usually very unhappy with the suffering that we have to experience in life. But what about the suffering that God has to endure? Did He really walk into Eden angry that day, the way that some people tell the story? Or did He call out to Adam from a heart crushed by grief with tears in his eyes? "Adam, where are you? What have you done?" I'm guessing if I was in charge, or if you were in charge, we would have acted much faster to flood the surface of the planet. I mean, just think about the revulsion you feel when you hear about just one absolutely horrible crime and then multiply that by millions. It's a good thing, as Peter reminds us, that God is patient toward you, not willing that any should perish, but that all should reach repentance. I mean, my heart aches when I see the kind of original beauty that is beyond my grasp. But let's be honest, I've never actually known it, not firsthand. And so while my sense of loss when I'm reading Genesis is profound, it can't even come close to the loss that God must feel. I'll be right back after this.
Here at the Voice of Prophecy, we're committed to creating top-quality programming for the whole family, like our audio adventure series, Discovery Mountain. Discovery Mountain is a Bible-based program for kids of all ages and backgrounds. Your family will enjoy the faith-building stories from this small mountain summer camp and town. With 24 seasonal episodes every year and fresh content every week, there's always a new adventure just on the horizon.
There's an old story about the Russian author Leo Tolstoy who decided he'd go and live with the peasants for a little while. They were people who actually lived on his family's estate, and he became curious enough to move into one of their dirty little hovels to experience life from their perspective. He ate their food, he worked the fields with them, and he slept in their beds. It was a pretty far cry from the wealth and privilege he normally enjoyed, and you'd think that the peasants would appreciate it because he was trying to identify with them. But to his great surprise, they didn't trust him. "Look," they said, "this is just a game for you. You're not stuck here forever like us because you can go back to your daddy's money anytime you choose." Now, I kind of get that. I sometimes have those same thoughts when I see an American president or a member of the British royal family spend a few hours with everyday working people. Somebody running for office suddenly shows up at the factory where people live a monotonous existence 40 hours a week or more, decade after decade after decade, and this candidate will pretend for just a few minutes that he or she can actually identify with them. But they can't, not really, because in a few minutes after the photo op, they're going to climb back into a private limousine and spend the night in a hotel that costs more per night than some people fork over as a monthly mortgage payment. So it's not really believable. And then if I'm perfectly honest, I'd have to say that I've actually experienced the other side of that equation. It's not that I'm wealthy, because believe me, I'm not. I'm anything but. But sometimes when I travel to a developing country where the average worker makes like $20 a month, and I'm suddenly the richest man in the room, I can tell they all know it. Now, I can express all kinds of sympathy. I can promise to raise money and send help. I can shed tears when they cry about how hard life is there. But everyone there knows that when the visit is over, I'm going to get back on a plane and return to an existence that most of them could only dream of. I remember visiting an impoverished village on the other side of the world, and as I was walking down the street, a mother suddenly came up to me, shoved a 2-year-old child into my arms, turned around and walked away. Now, that's a completely unnatural instinct for a mother. Most mothers would never give a child away. But of course, this lady understood that all she had to offer that kid was a life of unbelievable hardship. So she gave her child to this so-called rich American, assuming that I could take her home and give her a much better life. What she couldn't possibly know was that, well, A, there was no way I could take that kid out of the country, and B, by American standards, there was really no way I could afford to feed another mouth. But still, there was this little moment of guilt because I knew full well that even though I was experiencing the awfulness of these people's lives, at the end of the day, I was going to escape, and they never would. So now let's consider God's solution to the mess we made on this planet, because some people are going to think of this in similar terms. What difference would it make for the Son of God to become human and live right here among us? Was that really an authentic human existence? I mean, couldn't Jesus just blow the whistle at any given moment and go straight back to the glory of heaven? Was Jesus some kind of humanitarian tourist who came here to help repair a few buildings before he returned to the luxury of his own home? Was he merely sympathetic to our predicament, the way you feel sympathy when you see those ads of starving kids? I mean, how completely did Jesus identify with us? I think there might be an answer in the story of his betrayal. When Judas returned with the mob to arrest him, Peter was understandably upset, and he attempted to help by pulling out his sword and chopping off someone's ear. Jesus told him to stop and then said this, "Do you think that I cannot appeal to my Father and he will at once send me more than 12 legions of angels?" Now, that's the point I've been driving at. At any moment, Jesus could have tapped out. He could have walked away from the mob that was about to spit on him, mock him, and whip him like a common criminal. They were going to turn him over to the Romans to die by the most cruel method imaginable. But the fact is, Jesus did not tap out. Tolstoy went back home. I got on a plane, went back to my home. But Jesus so completely became one of us that you find him crying out in the dark, my God, why have you forsaken me?" He was so much like us that even people who do not believe that he was God in human flesh will point to Jesus and admit that he was the most noble example of a human being who has ever lived. And it's on this point that we find another deep heartache that is tied to something really, really beautiful. The longer you examine the life and teachings of Christ, the more your heart aches for the rest of humanity because it becomes so obvious that we are not like Christ. Our lives are broken and imperfect and driven by these dark, selfish impulses. In fact, we don't even see just how broken we are until we see the beauty of that one and only perfect human life you find recorded in the Gospels. Now, I'm pretty sure I've told you this story before, but quite a few years ago, I was working for a church that decided to renovate their basement. And the first thing they did was replace the dingy lighting. And I remember the anticipation of going downstairs to turn those new lights on for the first time, and we all thought it would make the basement look a whole lot better. That's not what happened. All it did was make it look worse, because now with new lights, you could see all of the flaws, some of which had been hidden in the dark. The basement looked better with the old lights. And that's kind of the way it is with the person of Christ. What you see when you examine his life and teachings is the way that human life is supposed to be. Except, of course, for the fact that Jesus had to live his perfect life in a broken world. And that means that his perfection is even more astonishing. Sometimes people despair of finding a meaningful relationship with God, and they'll tell me that they don't think that God can accept them because they're so horribly flawed. But that's the real point of the whole thing. Seeing your flaws more deeply is exactly what should happen if you're examining the life of Christ. It's really a bit of a paradox, because the closer you get to the light, the worse you're going to look. To study Jesus is to see yourself like you really are. There's no more deluding yourself, no more pretending that it's really not all that bad. Honestly, as a minister, I'm not really worried about people who feel sadness in the presence of Christ, because it means their conscience is still alive. I mean, don't forget what Jesus taught in John 16 regarding the work of the Spirit. He said, "And when He comes, He will convict the world concerning sin and righteousness and judgment." According to the Bible, the third person of the Godhead, the Holy Spirit, is Christ's continued presence in this world. And one of the Spirit's primary roles is to convict us of sin. That's how you actually know that your life falls way short of the glory of God. Many people know that the Greek word for sin is actually hamartia, which means missing the mark. It's a word that an archer might use if his arrow went wide and completely missed the target. What God does is allow you to see the life of Christ and know for sure you're nothing like Him. He's the one who makes your heart ache when you recognize that your life is not all that beautiful, or at least not as beautiful as it should be. And there's another paradox that comes from studying Christ, because while we know that we are not like Christ, the Bible underlines the idea that He is still like us. It's a comparison that seems to run in one direction, and as soon as I take a really quick break, we'll come back to that. But for right now, grab a pen and a piece of paper so that you can take advantage of this incredible offer from the good people at the Voice of Prophecy. And I'll be right back after this.
Dragons, beasts, cryptic statues. Bible prophecy can be incredibly vivid and confusing. If you've ever read Daniel or Revelation and come away scratching your head, you're not alone. Our free Focus on Prophecy guides are designed to help you unlock the mysteries of the Bible and deepen your understanding of God's plan for you and our world. Study online or request them by mail and start bringing prophecy into focus today.
Right before the break, we were talking about how examining the life of Christ can make you feel pretty inadequate. And I was mentioning how when somebody tells me, look, God can't accept me because I'm too broken, that feeling is actually a pretty good sign. I'm not really worried about people who feel inadequate when they compare themselves to Jesus. It means they're kind of getting the point. It's the boastful people, or even the apathetic people, that I worry about, because they're not getting it at all. Look, if you've been worried that your life looks miserable by comparison to God's standard, that actually means you're moving in the right direction. It likely means that God is working with you right now. What you're going through is exactly what's supposed to happen. The Bible calls that conviction. You know, I've been in the ministry for about 3 decades, and I can tell you, I feel less worthy today than when I first got started. Does that mean I'm a lost cause? No. And I can back that up with something that Paul wrote to the church in Rome. This might be my all-time favorite Bible passage from Romans 5 and verse 8. It says, "But God shows His love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us." The fact is that God isn't waiting for you to get everything right before you can approach Him, as if that was even possible. I mean, think about it. If you could achieve moral perfection before you came to God, that would mean you don't really need Him. God knows full well who you are, and He invites you anyway. But now let's get back to the paradox I mentioned before the break. What I said was that you and I are nothing like Christ, and that's the reason that we are both stunned by His sheer beauty and feel sadness at the very same moment. It's a little like that painting I found in my textbook. I suddenly knew that I could never live in a place that nice. And the same way I know that my life will never be like Christ's. But at the same time, the Bible teaches that Christ is like me. I mean, just listen to this unbelievable passage from the book of Hebrews, and I'm going to read quite a bit of this. Listen to this. It says, "Since therefore the children share in flesh and blood, He Himself likewise partook of the same things, that through death He might destroy the one who has the power of death, that is, the devil, and deliver all those who through fear of death were subject to lifelong slavery. For surely it is not angels that He helps, but He helps the offspring of Abraham. Therefore He had to be made like His brothers in every respect, so that He might become a merciful and faithful high priest in the service of God, to make propitiation for the sins of the people. For because He Himself has suffered when tempted, He is able to help those who are being tempted." You know, the reason we call this show Authentic is because we're exploring what it means to live an authentic human life. That's why we spend so much time looking at our very best efforts to understand ourselves. And for the most part, we've seen that human philosophers are at a loss to figure this out. We conceive of these very high ideals, but every time we try to implement them, every time we try to construct utopia, we completely blow it. But in Christ, we have this person who pulled it off against all odds, and in spite of the fact that the world was fighting Him every step of the way. He could have tapped out at any moment, and it would have been His right to do that. He owed us exactly nothing. But He went the distance and lived an authentic human life that continues to amaze everybody. I mean, even the most dedicated skeptic. Most people just instinctively understand that Christ's life is the best example we've got. That's why reading the Bible can become such a roller coaster of emotions. On the one hand, you feel this profound sadness because the beauty of this person is so profound. But then somehow you're still irresistibly drawn in His direction, and He helps you realize you are not alone in this world. There is a God who has noticed your suffering, and He's actually doing something about it. Even after Christ came back from the grave, you'll notice that He retained His humanity. The disciples were able to touch Him. He even had a bite to eat. He did not go back to the way it was before the incarnation. He has identified with us so completely that He adopted humanity forever. I'll be right back after this.
Are you searching for answers to life's toughest questions like, where is God when we suffer? Can I find real happiness? Or is there any hope for our chaotic world? The Discover Bible Guides will help you find the answers you're looking for. Visit us at BibleStudies.com or give us a call at 888-456-7933 for your free Discover Bible Guides. Study online on our secure website or have the free guides mailed right to your home. There is never a cost or obligation. The Discover Bible Guides are our free gift to you. Find answers in guides like, Does my life really matter to God? And a second chance at life. You'll find answers to the things that matter most to you in each of the 26 Discover Bible Guides. Visit BibleStudies.com and begin your journey today to discover answers to life's deepest questions.
I've always been a lover of beautiful things, at least I like to think I am, especially when it comes to music. One of my all-time favorites is the second movement from Beethoven's Seventh Symphony. It really just starts out with this one single note being repeated over and over and over and over, but the harmonies underneath it are so stirring. And the great composer just pulls you in with this relentless march that makes you feel like you're moving to something great. And again, as I'm sitting there listening to it, I experience this mixed bag of emotions. On the one hand, it's so irresistibly wonderful that I can't stop listening. But on the other hand, it's so beautiful that it stirs up feelings of sadness. Why? Well, it's because in this world, that kind of beauty is the exception, not the rule. Beethoven makes use of such a broad range of harmonic color that by comparison, my own daily existence begins to feel like I'm just living grayscale, black and white. The same is true for a handful of other pieces like Brahms' Romance in F major or the Nimrod Adagio by Elgar. There's just something about those works that reminds me that there is still beauty out there that completely transcends my monotonous, painful daily existence. There is something greater, something higher than this horrible mess we live in. For a guy who loves music, these kinds of compositions serve as a powerful reminder that the world was not always like this, not always this painful. And the sadness we feel when confronted with the beauty of those opening chapters of the book of Genesis, or the beauty of the person of Christ, there's a really good reason for those feelings. It's an expression of that eternity that God has placed in our hearts because God refuses to let us just drift off into the darkness of oblivion, to reap a fate that frankly we richly deserve. The fact that we still long for what we lost is proof positive that our Creator has not abandoned us, and He plans to restore us completely. It's proof that God's heart also aches over the condition of our world because He feels the disconnect just as profoundly as you do, and then some. And God is determined to do something about it, to do something to redeem you. I mean, if that wasn't true, then our hearts would just turn to stone and we would all stop caring as the lights just slowly went out. Thanks for joining me again this week. I'm Shawn Boonstra, and this has been another episode of Authentic. Hey, would you help us out? Click that like button, subscribe, and then drop a comment. That by far is the easiest way to help more people watch Authentic. It takes just a few seconds, it's free, and it helps Authentic reach people who are interested. So go ahead, like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks.